Claire had always lived a quiet, predictable life. She taught third grade at a small school in Chicago, where the chaos of 25 kids running around was about as wild as things got. Her days were filled with grading papers, planning lessons, and trying to convince her students that math could actually be fun. Life wasn't exciting, but it was safe, and for Claire, that was enough. So when the letter arrived one chilly October morning, she couldn't help but feel confused. It came from a lawyer's office she'd never heard of, written on thick, creamy paper that smelled faintly of old books. The message inside was short but startling. Her uncle, who she hadn't seen or spoken to since she was 10 years old, had passed away, and he'd left her something, a house. The news hit her like a punch to the gut. Not because she cared deeply about him, he'd been more of a distant figure than a family member, but because she didn't understand why he'd leave anything to her after all these years. They weren't close. They'd barely even exchanged Christmas cards. Still, curiosity gnawed at her. What kind of house would someone living halfway across the country leave behind? Was it valuable? Did it come with debts? Or worse, secrets? After debating for days, Claire finally decided to visit the property. If nothing else, she figured she owed it to herself to see what this mysterious inheritance entailed. Armed with a suitcase, a map scribbled by the liar, and a vague sense of unease, she set off on the long drive to rural Vermont. The journey was anything but pleasant. The roads grew narrower and bumpier the farther she went, twisting through dense forests that seemed to swallow up the sunlight. By the time she reached the address, dusk was settling over the landscape, casting everything in eerie shadows. When a taxi driver pulled over and pointed toward a dirt path leading into the woods, Claire hesitated. "Are you sure this is it?" she asked, eyeing the overgrown driveway skeptically. "That's the place," the driver replied, already backing away before she could change her mind. "Good luck." As the car disappeared down the road, leaving her alone with nothing but the sound of crickets chirping, Claire took a deep breath and started walking. The closer she got to the house, the heavier the air felt, as though the very atmosphere was pressing down on her shoulders. Finally, she emerged from the trees and saw it, the crumbling structure. Looming ahead, it looked like something out of a horror movie. The paint was peeling off in large flakes, revealing rotting wood beneath. Windows were either cracked or boarded up, and vines snaked their way up the walls like skeletal fingers. A sagging porch stretched across the front, its wooden planks groaning under the weight of neglect. Claire stood there for a moment, staring at the house, half expecting it to collapse right then and there. But despite its decrepit appearance, something about the place tugged at her. Maybe it was the way the last rays of sunlight caught on the faded shutters, giving them an almost golden glow. Or maybe it was the faint scent of lavender drifting on the breeze, reminding her of summers spent playing outside as a kid. Whatever it was, it made her take a step forward instead of turning back. The front door creaked loudly as she pushed it open, sending a shiver down her spine. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and every step she took stirred up clouds of it. Sunlight filtered weakly through gaps in the boarded-up windows, creating strange patterns on the floor. Everything was coated in grime, cobwebs hung from the corners. Furniture lay overturned, and piles of debris littered the space. It was clear no one had lived here in decades. For a while, Claire wandered aimlessly, taking in the decay. But then, just beyond the foyer, she noticed something odd. There was a door carved entirely out of dark wood, its surface covered in intricate symbols that looked almost otherworldly. Unlike the rest of the house, the door appeared untouched by time, smooth and polished as if someone had been caring for it recently. Intrigued, she reached out and touched it, feeling a strange warmth radiating from the wood. Her heart began to race. This wasn't normal. Houses like this didn't have doors like this. Pushing aside her growing unease, she turned the handle and stepped inside. What she found took her breath away. Instead of more ruin, the room was immaculate, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. Bookshelves lined the walls, each shelf packed tightly with leather-bound volumes. Papers and artifacts cluttered a massive oak desk in the center of the room, including journals filled with cramped handwriting. As Claire picked one up and flipped through the pages, her stomach dropped. Her uncle's name was scrawled across the top of nearly every entry, detailing experiments and theories that sounded straight out of science fiction. And then, tucked beneath the desk, she spotted a locked box. Something told her whatever was. Inside held answers she wasn't sure she wanted to know. The box sat there, almost mocking her with its silence. It was small enough to fit in both hands, made of dark wood polished so smoothly it reflected the dim light filtering through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. A tiny keyhole gleamed, faintly at the front, taunting her curiosity. Claire hesitated, her fingers hovering over the lid. What if opening it unleashed something she couldn't handle? But then again, what choice did she have? This house, this strange, decaying shell of a home, had already pulled her into its orbit. She couldn't walk away now. After rummaging through the desk drawers, she finally found a rusted key tucked inside an old inkwell. Her heart pounded as she slid it into the lock and turned it slowly. The click echoed in the quiet room, sharp and final. With trembling hands, she opened the box. Inside lay a crystal orb, no bigger than a baseball, glowing faintly with an inner light that seemed alive. It pulsed gently, like a heartbeat, casting soft hues of blue and green across the desk. Claire stared at it, mesmerized. She reached out instinctively, her fingertips brushing against its surface, and that's when everything changed. A sudden chill swept through the room, raising goosebumps on her arms. The air grew heavy, pressing down on her chest, and a low hum filled the space, vibrating deep in her bones. Then came the whispers. They were faint at first, barely audible, but quickly grew louder, swirling around her like a chorus of voices, speaking in languages she didn't recognize. Some sounded melodic, others harsh and guttural. Claire froze, her breath catching in her throat. She yanked her hand back, stumbling away from the desk. The orb's glow intensified for a brief moment, before fading completely, leaving the room darker than before. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence that felt heavier than any sound ever could. Claire stood there, clutching the edge of the desk, her mind racing. Had she imagined it? Was this some kind of trick, or had the house itself come alive? That night, sleep eluded her. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the broken windows, kept her wide awake. She told herself it was just nerves, the result of being in such an unfamiliar place. But deep down, she knew better. Something about the orb and the symbols carved into the wooden door felt unnatural, like they belonged to another world. Entirely unable to shake off the unease, Claire decided to dive deeper into her uncle's notes. She dragged the journals and papers onto the desk, spreading them out under the flickering light of an oil lamp she'd scavenged from one of the closets. As she flipped through the pages, a pattern began to emerge. Her uncle hadn't been just jotting down random thoughts. He'd been documenting something far more extraordinary. His writing spoke of energy fields and hidden dimensions, phrases that sounded like they belonged in a sci-fi novel rather than a dusty old journal. He described experiments involving crystals, electromagnetic frequencies, and rituals designed to tap into forces beyond human understanding. One entry caught her attention. Asterisk. The veil is thinner here. I can feel it calling me. Asterisk at first. Claire dismissed it as nonsense. People often let their imaginations run wild when left alone for too long. But the more she read, the harder it became to ignore the possibility that her uncle might have stumbled upon something real, something dangerous. And judging by the state of the house, whatever he discovered hadn't ended well for him. As dawn broke, Claire found herself staring at the orb again. Its glow had returned, faint but steady, as though it were waiting for her to make the next move. Against her better judgment, she picked it up, holding it carefully in her palms. This time, instead of fear, she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. It was as if the orb was trying to communicate not with words, but with emotions. Warmth spread through her body, followed by a surge of clarity. For a fleeting moment, she understood why her uncle had devoted his life to studying this mysterious force. It wasn't madness, it was wonder, but wonder came with risks. That much was clear from the scribbled warnings scattered throughout the journals. Her uncle had written about entities slipping through the cracks between worlds, drawn by the energy generated by his experiments. He mentioned seeing shadows moving where no light should fall, hearing footsteps in empty hallways, and feeling eyes watching him even when he was alone. Claire shivered at the thought. Was this why the house felt so alive? Were those same entities still lingering here, waiting for someone else to open the door? By mid-morning, Claire realized she needed answers and fast. If her uncle's research was accurate, the orb wasn't just a pretty trinket. It was a tool, a key to unlocking something far greater than she could comprehend. But using it blindly would be reckless. She needed guidance, someone who could help her make sense of what she'd uncovered. Flipping through the journals once more, she stumbled upon a name scrawled in the margins, Dr. Evelyn Marsh. According to the notes, Dr. Marsh was an expert in folklore and metaphysics, someone her uncle had consulted during his early experiments. Claire jotted down the name and address listed beside it, her resolve hardening. If anyone could shed light on the mysteries of the house and the orb, it was this person. Before leaving, Claire packed the orb and a few of the journals into a bag, along with some essentials she brought from home. She wasn't sure how long she'd be gone, but she knew she couldn't leave the artifacts behind. Whatever power they held, it was tied to the house, and taking them with her felt like the safest option. As she stepped outside, the sunlight hit her face, momentarily blinding her. For the first time since arriving, she noticed how beautiful the surrounding landscape was. Rolling hills stretched out as far as the eye could see, dotted with clusters of trees ablaze with autumn colors. The contrast between the serene countryside and the eerie interior of the house struck her as ironic. On the surface, everything seemed peaceful, but beneath, chaos simmered. The drive to Dr. Marsh's cabin took several hours, winding through narrow roads flanked by towering pines. By the time she arrived, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Knocking on the door, Claire braced herself for what might come next. She had no idea whether Dr. Marsh would believe her story or, worse, dismiss her as delusional. All she knew was that she couldn't face this alone anymore. When the door creaked open, revealing a frail woman with silver hair and piercing gray eyes, Claire felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she'd found the ally she desperately needed. Dr. Evelyn Marsh wasn't what Claire had expected. The woman standing in the doorway looked like she'd stepped straight out of a storybook, a mix between a wise old sage and someone who spent most of her life surrounded by books and secrets. Her silver hair was tied back in a loose bun, and her gray eyes seemed to pierce right through Claire, as if they could see every thought swirling in her mind. Despite her frail appearance, there was an undeniable strength about her, a quiet confidence that put Claire at ease. "Come in," Dr. Marsh said simply, stepping aside to let Claire enter. The cabin was cozy but cluttered, with shelves crammed full of books and strange artifacts, carved figurines, jars filled with dried herbs, and maps covered in cryptic symbols. A fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. Claire hesitated for a moment before following her inside, clutching the bag containing the orb and journals tightly. "I didn't know if you'd remember my uncle," Claire began, setting the items on a small wooden table near the fire. "He mentioned you in his notes." Dr. Marsh raised an eyebrow, her gaze flickering toward the bag. "Your uncle? Let me guess he left you something unusual." Claire nodded, pulling out the orb first. Its faint glow illuminated the dimly lit room, drawing a sharp intake of breath from Dr. Marsh. She moved closer, studying it intently without touching it. "Where did he find this?" she asked, her voice low and serious. "I don't know exactly," Claire admitted, "but I think it has something to do with the house. He wrote about energy fields and hidden dimensions. And then there's this." She handed over one of the journals, flipping it open to a page marked with diagrams and notes about the orb. Dr. Marsh skimmed through the pages, her expression growing darker with each passing moment. Finally, she set the journal down and sighed heavily. Your uncle was playing with forces far beyond his understanding, or anyone else's, for that matter. These orbs are relics, ancient tools used by civilizations long forgotten. They're conduits designed to amplify certain energies. But they're also dangerous. Very dangerous. What kind of energies? Claire asked, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to stay calm. The kind that exist between worlds. Dr. Marsh replied cryptically. Think of reality as layers, overlapping but separate. Most people live their entire lives unaware of these layers. But some places, like your uncle's house, sit on fault lines where the barriers are thinner. The orbs can open those barriers, allowing glimpses into other realms. Sometimes, though, things slip through. Claire felt a chill run down her spine. Things? Dr. Marsh nodded grimly. Entities, creatures, forces we can't fully comprehend. Your uncle's notes mentioned shadows moving where no light falls, whispers in empty rooms. All signs that he succeeded in opening a rift. But controlling such power is nearly impossible. Once the veil is breached, it's hard to close it again. The weight of Dr. Marsh's words settled heavily on Claire. She glanced at the orb, its soft glow now seeming more menacing than beautiful. So what happens now? What am I supposed to do with this? That depends on you, Dr. Marsh said, leaning back in her chair. You have two choices. Destroy the orb and seal the rift permanently, or continue exploring what your uncle started. But be warned, if you choose the latter, you'll be walking a path fraught with risks. Crossing the veil changes people, Claire. It leaves marks on your soul that never fade. Claire sat in silence, staring into the fire. Destroying the orb felt like the safest option, but part of her, the same part that had been drawn to the house in the first place, wanted answers. She needed to understand why her uncle had devoted his life to this, why he'd left it all to her. And maybe, just maybe, she wanted to see what lay beyond the veil herself. When Claire returned to the house the next day, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Armed with protective charms given to her by Dr. Marsh, bundles of herbs, salt circles, and instructions for rituals meant to ward off unwanted attention, she prepared herself for what might come next. Dr. Marsh had warned her not to act impulsively. But Claire knew she couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward the orb any longer. Her first task was to explore the rest of the house. There were still rooms she hadn't ventured into, corners shrouded in darkness that begged to be uncovered. As she climbed the creaky staircase to the second floor, she noticed something odd about the layout. The walls seemed uneven, as if they'd been built haphazardly, and certain sections of the floorboards felt hollow beneath her feet. Following her instincts, she pressed on a section of wall paneling near the end of the hallway and gasped as it swung open, revealing a narrow passageway. Heart racing, Claire grabbed a flashlight and stepped inside. The passage led downward, spiraling into the bowels of the house until she reached a heavy wooden door carved with runes. identical to those on the door in the study. This time, however, the carvings glowed faintly, pulsing in sync with the orb's rhythm. Claire hesitated, her hand hovering over the handle. Whatever lay beyond this door, she knew it would change everything. Taking a deep breath, she pushed it open. The chamber beyond was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Crystals jutted out from the walls, casting prismatic reflections across the room. At the center stood a pedestal holding another orb, larger and darker than the one upstairs. Its surface shimmered like liquid obsidian, drawing her gaze irresistibly. Against her better judgment, Claire approached it, reaching out to touch it, and then the world exploded. A torrent of images flooded her mind, too fast to process. Swirling galaxies stretched endlessly before her, stars birthing and dying in bursts of light. Shadowy figures moved in the periphery, their forms shifting and indistinct. Voices echoed around her, speaking in languages that defied comprehension, yet carried an undeniable urgency. Claire staggered backward, clutching her head as the visions overwhelmed her senses. When the onslaught finally subsided, she collapsed to the floor, drenched in sweat and gasping for air. The orb sat silently on the pedestal, its surface smooth once more. But Claire knew with absolute certainty that she had glimpsed something extraordinary. Something terrifying. As she sat there, trying to steady her breathing, she realized the truth. The house wasn't just a crumbling relic. It was a gateway. And the orbs weren't just tools, they were keys. Keys to unlocking mysteries that spanned far beyond her wildest imagination. Now, the question remained, what would she do with them? The visions from the larger orb lingered in Claire's mind long after she dragged herself out of the hidden chamber. Her body ached, her muscles stiff from lying on the cold stone floor for who knows how long, but it was her thoughts that felt truly battered. The images had been vivid, too real to dismiss as mere hallucinations. She could still feel the weight of those shadowy figures watching her, their presence both alien and strangely familiar. And then there were the voices, speaking in languages she couldn't understand yet somehow grasped on an instinctual level. They weren't hostile, not exactly, but they carried a sense of urgency, like they were trying to warn her about something. As she climbed the stairs back to the main part of the house, her head spun with questions. What had her uncle really been chasing? Why had he left this bizarre legacy to her, of all people? And most importantly, what was she supposed to do now? Destroy the orbs and seal the rift forever, as Dr. Marsh had suggested? Or follow the path her uncle had started down, even if it meant risking everything? By the time she reached the study, night had fallen outside, cloaking the house in darkness. Claire lit a few candles, their flickering light casting dancing shadows. Across the walls, sitting at the desk, she stared at the smaller orb, the one she'd found first. It glowed faintly, almost reassuringly, as though it knew she needed comfort after what she'd just experienced. For a moment, she let herself imagine that the orbs weren't dangerous tools but companions, guiding her through whatever lay ahead. But deep down, she knew better. These artifacts weren't benign. They were keys to forces far greater than she could fully comprehend, and using them came with consequences. Still, the pull was undeniable. Something inside her whispered that she couldn't turn away now, not when she'd come so far. Not when the answers might be within reach. The next morning, Claire decided to revisit her uncle's journals, hoping to piece together more clues about how to proceed. She spread the notebooks across the desk, flipping through pages filled with cramped handwriting and cryptic diagrams. One entry caught her eye, a sketch of the house with strange symbols marking certain rooms. Beneath it, her uncle had written, asterisk, the energy flows strongest here. Asterisk. Following the map, Claire explored the house again, paying close attention to areas marked on the diagram. In the attic, she discovered a trapdoor leading to another hidden space, this one filled with dusty equipment, old radios, coils of wire, and jars containing unidentifiable substances. It looked like her uncle had been conducting experiments. Up here, attempting to harness or manipulate the energies he believed flowed through the house. Among the clutter, she found a small leather-bound notebook tucked beneath a pile of papers. Inside were detailed instructions for activating the orbs, complete with warnings scrawled in red ink. Asterisk. Do not attempt without proper preparation. The veil is unpredictable. Despite the ominous tone, Claire read on, absorbing every word. According to the notes, the orbs worked in tandem, one to open the rift, the other to stabilize it. But stabilizing the connection required immense focus and strength, qualities her uncle seemed to doubt he possessed. As Claire pored over the instructions, a plan began to form in her mind. If she could activate both orbs simultaneously, perhaps she could gain control over the rift and see for herself what lay beyond. It was risky, yes, but wasn't that what her uncle had done? Hadn't he taken the same leap into the unknown, driven by curiosity and wonder? Maybe she owed it to him and to herself to finish what he'd started. That evening, Claire prepared carefully, following Dr. Marsh's advice to create protective barriers around the hidden chamber. She scattered salt along the edges of the room, hung bundles of dried herbs from the ceiling, and lit candles infused with oils meant to ward off negative energies. Then, taking a deep breath, she placed the smaller orb on the pedestal beside the larger one. Her hands trembled as she activated the ritual, chanting the phrases her uncle had written in his notes. At first, nothing happened. The orbs sat silently, their surfaces dull and lifeless, but then, slowly, they began to glow. The light grew brighter, filling the chamber with a radiant energy that made Claire's skin tingle. The air crackled with electricity, and the ground beneath her feet vibrated faintly. Suddenly, the world around her shifted. The walls dissolved into swirling colors, and the floor dropped away, leaving her suspended in a vast expanse of light and shadow. Before she could react, shapes began to emerge, towering crystalline structures stretching toward multiple suns hanging in a kaleidoscopic sky. Ethereal beings moved gracefully among them, their forms shimmering like liquid silver. They turned to look at her, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly intelligence. Claire froze, overwhelmed by the sheer beauty and strangeness of it all. The beings didn't speak aloud, but she could feel their thoughts brushing against hers, communicating in ways that transcended language. They weren't hostile, in fact, they seemed curious, intrigued by her presence. One of them stepped closer, extending a translucent hand toward her. Hesitant but unable to resist, Claire reached out and touched it. In that instant, memories flooded her mind, not her own, but fragments of someone else's life. She saw flashes of her uncle, younger and full of ambition, standing in this very realm. He had come here seeking knowledge, driven by a desire to understand the mysteries of existence. But something had gone wrong. She saw him struggling to maintain control, the rift between worlds growing unstable. And then, finally, she saw him making a choice, a sacrifice to protect both realms from collapsing into chaos. Tears streamed down Claire's face as the vision faded, leaving her standing once again in the chamber. The orb's glow dimmed and the world snapped back into focus. Exhausted but determined, she realized what she had to do. Her uncle hadn't failed. He had given everything to keep the balance intact. Now it was her turn to carry the torch. When Claire emerged from the hidden chamber hours later, she felt different, lighter, yet heavier at the same time. The experience had changed her, opening her eyes to possibilities she'd never dreamed of. She didn't fully understand what she'd witnessed, but she knew one thing for sure. The house wasn't just a crumbling relic. It was a bridge, a gateway, to wonders beyond imagination, and she intended to honor her uncle's legacy by protecting it at any cost. When Claire finally stepped out of the hidden chamber, her legs felt like jelly and her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. She had seen things that defied logic, realms beyond comprehension, beings that seemed to exist outside of time itself. Yet, despite the overwhelming strangeness of it all, she couldn't shake the sense of clarity that had settled over her. For the first time in her life, she felt connected, not just to the house or the orbs, but to something much bigger. Something timeless. The house itself seemed different now, too. The oppressive weight that had hung in the air since her arrival was gone, replaced by an almost serene stillness. Even the creaks and groans of the old wooden floors sounded softer, less menacing. It was as if the energy coursing through the place had shifted, aligning itself with her newfound understanding. Claire wandered through the rooms, touching the walls, running her fingers over the carvings on the wooden doors. This wasn't just a structure anymore. It was alive, breathing, and somehow aware of her presence. She knew what she had to do next. Her uncle's sacrifice had kept the rift stable for years, but the connection between worlds was fragile. If left unchecked, it could collapse again, unleashing chaos not only in the house but possibly in the surrounding area and beyond. Claire couldn't let that happen. She owed it to him, to the beings she'd met in the other realm, and to herself to ensure the balance remained intact. Over the next few weeks, Claire threw herself into restoring the house. At first, it was purely practical, patching up broken windows, clearing out debris, and fixing the leaky roof. But as she worked, she began to see the project as more than just repairs. Each nail hammered, each coat of paint applied, felt like a step toward honoring her uncle's memory. She wanted the house to reflect the beauty and mystery she discovered within its walls, even if no one else would ever fully understand. During this time, she also reached out to Dr. Marsh for guidance. The older woman became a kind of mentor, offering advice on how to maintain the protective barriers around the house and sharing stories of others who had dabbled in similar forces throughout history. "You're not alone in this," Dr. Marsh told her one evening during a phone call. "There have always been people drawn to these mysteries. The trick is knowing when to push forward and when to pull back." Claire took those words to heart. She spent hours studying her uncle's notes, learning everything she could about the orbs and the rituals needed to keep the rift stable. Slowly, she grew more confident in her abilities, trusting her instincts when it came to handling the artifacts. The smaller orb, which she kept close at hand, seemed to respond to her touch now, glowing warmly whenever she held it. It was almost as if it trusted her too. But maintaining the house wasn't just about physical labor or mastering ancient rituals. It was also about confronting her own fears and doubts. There were nights when the whispers returned, faint but persistent, echoing through the empty halls. Shadows moved where no light should fall, and cold spots appeared without explanation. On those occasions, Claire reminded herself of what she'd seen in the other realm, the wonder, the beauty, and yes, the responsibility. These phenomena weren't threats. They were reminders of the delicate balance she was tasked with preserving. As spring approached, Claire decided to open the house to others, not as a museum or tourist attraction, but as a sanctuary. She invited local artists, writers, and musicians to stay for free, encouraging them to use the space as a retreat for creativity. Word spread quickly, and soon, strangers began arriving from all over, each bringing their own unique energy to the house. Some claimed to feel inspired while working in certain rooms, describing bursts of insight or sudden clarity. Others reported vivid dreams or fleeting glimpses of shapes moving in the corners of their vision. Claire listened to their stories, with a knowing smile, never confirming or denying anything. She didn't need to explain. The house spoke for itself. Among the visitors was a young man who introduced himself as a historian specializing in folklore. He marveled at the carvings on the wooden door, recognizing symbols he'd only read about in ancient texts. Another guest, a painter, spent days sketching the swirling patterns cast by the crystals in the hidden chamber, producing works so mesmerizing they brought tears to Claire's eyes. Watching these strangers interact with the house filled her with a profound sense of purpose. She wasn't just protecting the legacy of her uncle. She was creating something new, something meaningful. Of course, not everyone understood. Some neighbors whispered about the haunted house on the hill, warning curious passersby to steer clear. Claire didn't mind. Let them believe what they wanted. The truth was far stranger and far more beautiful than any ghost story. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Claire sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The air was cool, carrying the scent of blooming wildflowers. She closed her eyes, letting the sounds of nature wash over her, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. For the first time in months, she felt truly at peace. And then, faintly, she heard it. A whisper, soft and distant, carried on the wind. It wasn't threatening or urgent, just there. Claire smiled, opening her eyes to gaze at the stars beginning to twinkle in the darkening sky. She didn't need to turn around to know that the house stood behind her, watching over her just as it always had. In that moment, she realized something important. The house wasn't hers. Not really. It belonged to the earth, to the energies flowing beneath its foundations, to the countless generations who had walked its halls before her. All she could do was care for it, nurture it, and pass it along when the time came. Her uncle's spirit lingered somewhere within these walls, she was sure of it. Sometimes, late at night, she'd catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of her eye or hear the faintest echo of laughter drifting down the hallway. It comforted her, knowing he was still here in some form, guiding her even now. Claire took another sip of tea, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. Whatever lay ahead, whether it was more challenges, more discoveries, or simply the quiet rhythm of everyday life, she was ready. The house had changed her, shaped her into someone stronger, braver, and more open to the mysteries of the world. And for that, she would always be grateful. As the stars blinked brighter above, Claire leaned back in her chair, content in the knowledge that she had found her place. The crumbling house in the middle of nowhere wasn't just a home anymore. It was a bridge, a haven, and a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with a single step into the unknown.